Mason University Libraries. And we are very thrilled to have the GMU forensics team here, part of them. Right. How many are there of you total?
There's 26, I believe.
26. And so I'm going to let Nathan, who is the captain, correct? Co-captain.
Limited preparation captain.
Limited
Sans the
preparation
actual
captain.
captain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. My bad. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to let them explain exactly what a forensics team does, or what forensics is all about. And in the event that you don't know, you may already know because you're in comm, I think, aren't you? Yeah? Okay. Yes. But anyway, we're very happy to have you here celebrating with us International Open Access Week. Is everyone familiar with what open access is? A little bit? Okay. Anybody else? Hand raising? No. Okay, open access is a movement that's been around for, oh gosh, probably 10 or more years in focusing on making research and data and even more recently media freely available to people to use, reuse, modify, etc., without asking the permission of the copyright owner. Now, we could go on and on about copyright, but I won't do that to you. But today what we're going to do is focus specifically on media and what media means to us to be able to share media, what kinds of publishing models are being used now, how you're curating your data and sharing it with people, and also how we will continue to promote this effort in order to have open access as widely and freely available as possible. I would like for you to introduce your speakers more specifically, if you would like. Nathan Lays, the Thank you.
I'm Nathan. I am the limited preparation events captain on the GMU forensics team. I'm a junior in Spagia. I'm a government and international politics major.
My name is Samuel Abney. I am a senior in the communication department with a concentration in public relations, and I am one of the co-captains of the GMU forensics team. And I'm super excited to be here today.
And I'm Natalia Castro. I'm a sophomore on the Mason Forensics team, and my major is integrative studies, concentrating in international studies and education.
And I'm AK. I'm a senior. I'm also in Spagia, which I've never heard of before, but sounds really good. And yeah, I'm also very excited to be here. Let's learn.
So we're all members of the GMU forensics team. We all do extemporaneous speaking, which is an event inside of forensics where we do a lot of reading about current events, research from newspapers to journals to books, and then we collate it, and we are given a topic at tournaments. We have 30 minutes to prepare, write, research, and memorize a 7-minute speech that we deliver extemporaneously without notes to a judge or a panel of judges. So we are going to be talking about open access a little outside of what we traditionally work with in extemp, but we're all really excited to be here. Open Access Week, for those of you who may not be as familiar with it, it's a really exciting opportunity. The GMU library system does a great job working with it. I don't know if you saw the obstacle course out front. Did you know that the obstacle course also doubles as a giant metaphor for paywalls? So we're definitely really excited to participate. It's a great opportunity, and we want to give a big shout out and thank you to Claudia and to her assistant Caroline Strunk, who've been really amazing in helping us out with that. So I'm going to do a few brief remarks, and then we're going to go into the 4 presentations that we have prepared for you. So traditionally, open access is thought of in academic circles as something about journals, research, and peer-reviewed research especially, and to an extent also other forms of media, journalism, for example. But in this roundtable, we're going to expand that definition a little bit, that open access isn't just confined to academia, that it's any kind of freely accessible media, which is part of the movement that hasn't gotten as much attention. And we're not just talking about different kinds of media. This roundtable is focused on entertainment, so you're going to hear about theater, You're going to hear about music as well as peer-reviewed journals. But it's also about different types of access as well. So you're going to hear about access for people with disabilities at theaters. You're going to hear, for example, about access to different kinds of artwork online as opposed to in person, which will be really, really exciting. So if you take one thing away as a general theme from this discussion, it's basically that open access is about more than just paywalls. It's about how you access any kind of media that you don't pay for in a traditional form. That's the big takeaway. So I'm going to start us off. What my topic is basically how open access is changing how entertainment companies generate revenue. So where does the money come from? Basically, there are two models of how entertainment companies of any kind get money. There's subscriber and there's ad-supported. So a subscriber model is basically Netflix or HBO now. Like you pay a monthly or a yearly fee or whatever, and you get the content. Another format is like Google Play, for example, where you pay for an individual issue or you pay for an individual movie, and you get the content from there. I'm going to be focusing more on ad-supported content, which is, especially since the internet revolution, become a lot more prevalent. And obviously they're not mutually exclusive. Like you can subscribe to Hulu Plus and still see ads, which is annoying, but also proves that they're not mutually exclusive. So ad-supported entertainment media differs from like broadcast TV or radio in the way that I'm talking about because it is collaborative. And it's collaborative because it requires sharing between individuals. And most often this happens on social media platforms. This isn't about social media, but it certainly involves them. So here we go. A couple of concepts that I'm going to talk about. The first one is system effects, which is a really boring term for a really simple concept. A system effect is when a platform or a product increases in value the more people use it. So, for example, Facebook is more valuable than Twitter because more people use Facebook. And Twitter and Facebook are obviously collaborative platforms. The more friends you have, the more people you read. That is a collaboration. In a very different way than, say, reading a newspaper doesn't imply that you're collaborating with everyone else who reads that newspaper. So Twitter has 304 million users, and that's stagnant. Their user base is not growing at nearly the rate that they would hope. And only 44% of Twitter users access their data on a daily basis. Compare that to Facebook, which is almost 5 times as many people, has almost 2/3 of users accessing it daily, and at one point had 1 billion people use Facebook on the same day just a few months ago. And the illustration of the systemic effect, that the value increases the more people you use, that in ad revenue, Twitter per user per quarter generates $4.33. Facebook generates $8.63. It's more expensive to advertise on platforms that are more popular because more people are going to collaborate in seeing it. I'm also going to bring up Google a lot, which kind of really pioneered the targeting of advertisements. So if you ever like search on Amazon for like life-size cutout of Draco Malfoy, and then you go to a completely unrelated website, and all of a sudden you're getting Harry Potter-related advertisements, that's Google Ad Services. So Google, and this is just in The Economist this morning, that Google has about 40% of online ad revenue, 40%. And Facebook has between 15 and 20%. Between those two companies, over half of advertisements that you see online are going to their coffers. The second concept I'm going to talk about is mosaic theory. So mosaic theory of information really got developed in the intelligence community, actually. And it's the idea that you can develop a very clear picture of who someone is, what they do, what their habits are, from lots of tiny scraps of freely available information. So metadata, for example. You can get a really good idea of somebody's habits based on knowing that they call Domino's Pizza 6 times a week, and that the only places they go are work and home. You don't need to look at their communications, and you don't need to look at what they're doing on their drives to figure that out. That's mosaic. And the way they interact is that the more information a company or an ad service has about you, the more effectively they can target advertisements to your interests. And generally the thesis of this that I'm making is that collaboration on social media is turning revenue generators from producers and subscriber models and incentivizing these entertainment providers as platforms instead. So I'll give John Oliver as an example. John Oliver really appears in two different formats, which is really interesting to me. The first is YouTube, where his show posts official clips of every segment that he does, and then you can go on and watch it for free. And then you can also subscribe to HBO and watch it. Probably more people have seen individual clips of John Oliver that go viral over Facebook, that go viral over Twitter, than watch it on HBO. But they're very different models for the same kind of entertainment. So his clip on FIFA, which you've probably seen, it went really viral, has over 11 million views on YouTube. That makes the advertising on YouTube way more valuable than it would be on HBO. So the thing is that when you watch John Oliver on YouTube, YouTube is owned by Google. So Google gets the metadata, if your computer is set to share it, which most of ours are, of your location, what your watching habits are, depending on the cookie settings, what your shopping habits are, and so on. If you're logged into a Google account, they get more, incidentally. So it's all a little bit Orwellian if 1984 was about multinational corporations instead of a totalitarian state. And Facebook is increasingly a platform. It's not just a social media site. They're focusing more on email-related services, for example. And they have this motto on their homepage. It's been there basically since they started over 10 years ago, that Facebook is free and it always will be. But here's the thing. Facebook can and does tell advertisers, if you're a 40-year-old married white woman who belongs to the Republican Party, works in the medical field in a mid-sized office, has an income between $50,000 and $60,000, drives a Toyota, accesses their media through an iPhone 6, and has a 12-year-old son, and has their anniversary coming up in 2 weeks. That is all information that, through the terms and conditions, Facebook will share with advertisers. And you can target products very effectively using that much information. So basically, through the collaborative effects of sharing entertainment, you may not be paying in dollars. Like, you're not paying John Oliver, but you're paying Facebook and you're paying YouTube in data instead of hard currency. And that data develops into something that's very easily converted into currency by advertising products. And another interesting thing is that the consumers of your data aren't just businesses. People try to sell you things that aren't just products. So there are firms like Cambridge Analytica, which is just one example. It's working for Ted Cruz's campaign, but there are dozens of firms like this. They offer psychological profiles of individual voters based on Myers-Briggs style personality tests that they don't run by asking you to take a Myers-Briggs personality test. They run Myers-Briggs personality tests by looking at your online presence. Like, Ted Cruz's campaign could very well have a file on your psychographic profile that's more detailed than anything you know. And that's all because the rise of data sharing about our own, personal habits as a form of paying for media has become so explosive. There are two implications that I just want to end with. The first is the commodification of personhood. So, really, the question boils down to, is it more problematic for HBO to have your credit card number or for Google to know your deepest hopes and fears? There's this kind of neoliberal critique that through selling your personal identity to pay for things, that you're viewing your own identity or you're giving permission to corporations to view you through an economic lens instead of through a human-focused lens. I really think that this goes to the question of if identity is immutable. So it seems to me, and it's not my field, this is really a question for someone else to answer, that if Google or the NSA is gathering this mosaic of you, that like a mosaic, it's imperfect. They're not capturing a perfect portrait of your identity because that's impossible. They're assembling a jigsaw of snapshots. So whether it's more problematic for that to happen than to be trading financial data is, I think, a really interesting debate, and I think it's one that we need to have, and that's the first implication. The second is an issue of privacy. So really the question is, does Ted Cruz's campaign, or having a file on your psychographic profile, violate your privacy? Or does Google having the same kind of information to micro-target ad services violate your privacy? My initial reaction is no, and here's why. The first is that this is for algorithmic use, that it's not for individual human use. So most modern conceptions of privacy assume that it's not just that your personal information isn't just owned by you, it's that another human is viewing it. But the thing is, it's an impersonal algorithm that's viewing it. So if Google micro-targets an ad service that I might be searching I don't know, an embarrassing number of things on Amazon about foam comforter mattresses, right? I just really want a memory foam mattress for cheap. And Google starts targeting things to me based on my sleeping habits. That's not necessarily a violation of privacy because no one at Google necessarily looked at that data. They don't have the time or resources and there's no reason to. And the second reason is that very little of this information was private to begin with. So for most people, your gender, your hometown, your age, your address, even your fashion or food preferences aren't necessarily private data. That's something that someone who sees you in a public sphere could easily find out. And it doesn't, to me, just inherently make sense that when you start collating data, all these pieces of public information form a private whole. But I think there is a risk for privacy, and there is a debate that needs to happen. Because what if someone hacks an ad company and uses that collected information to break security questions? It literally just happened to the CIA's, John Brennan, the chair of the CIA, that they use publicly available information, or the types of information that are publicly available, to break his AOL email account. Or that if there is a reason why it does violate privacy, we need better definitions of privacy to explain why. The whole debate over collaboration in media and selling data instead of dollars requires much clearer bright lines of what is private and what is public. And that's something that, as someone who's very interested in these issues, I have not seen that discussion happening. So that's really my argument, that we're selling data instead of dollars, that this is collaborative because we're sharing entertainment media and other forms of media across social platforms. And with that, I will turn it over to Sam, who's going to talk a little bit about open access in a very specific form of entertainment, which is theater.
Hello. Jumping off of what Nathan was saying, I will be talking a lot about how open access has been implemented in the theater world in a few different phases. Open access, as far as theater is concerned a lot with collaboration. Now, Bertolt Brecht, who is a very celebrated theater theorist, performing arts studies mastermind, argued that the whole crux of theater comes from a collaboration that exists between the performers and the audience members, in that the performers feed off of the energy, reactions, etc. that the audience provides, and therefore they create a collaborative experience in those ways. Open access sort of reshapes the way that collaboration occurs within the theater world. And it does so in two ways by combating two major problems in the theater world. The first is accessibility, and the second being price. So there's been a large decline, and I'm sure many people are aware of this, a large decline of ticket sales among Broadway theaters over the past decade especially. With the rise of movies, more immersive television shows, and higher quality of entertainment in other fields, people no longer feel like they need to be shelling out several $100s for a night at the theater. But it also has a stigma attached to it that theater is only reserved for those who are of the hoity-toity class, let's just say. And so you have not only the problem of people not necessarily having the funds to reach a theater and have that access, but then there's also physical accessibility, such as people with wheelchairs. And this has been a large discussion in the theater world, both in for-profit and non-profit, as far as getting enough ramps, the right type of doors, the right amount of elevators. There are many theater companies that still are struggling with the fact that they only have one elevator in their building, despite the fact that they may have a 1,500-seat theater, which becomes difficult. So open access has existed in several phases. I'll be talking about each of the phases of open access, sort of its history and origins within the theater world, its modern applications, and then finally discussing what the future of open access will be in theater and what it means for the collaborative experience for the audience and performer along the way. So the main history of open access in theater is that it started as an open accessibility movement. A large part of that being providing the means for people who are in wheelchairs or who have other handicaps such as not being able to hear properly, and providing all of these disabilities the proper way to be experiencing theater at a similar level as other audience members. That was the first sort of initial wave. However, the second part of open access's history has been this move in order to break down class walls that have been created in the theater world. And that is by providing free performances. There's two major examples of this that have become very popularized in the United States. The first being the Miami-Dade Theater Company down in Florida, right? Miami's in Florida, yes? Yes. I always forget where Miami is. And then second, the Shakespeare Theater Company right here in Washington, D.C. Both of these have used government funds, particularly through the National Endowment for the Arts, in order to be providing free shows for their consumer base for roughly a week to 2 weeks of their theater season. This is a way for them to be having people in their physical theater to increase the amount of collaboration that they have with a wider set of audience members. And this has benefits not only for the audience who is now able to see the show, but for the theater themselves, who is now able to cultivate a younger audience who typically doesn't have the money to go to the theater, to be returning and perhaps be paying for their tickets the next time because they enjoyed their performance so much. And this has been worked to great success, especially for the Shakespeare Theater Company, which now does a free-for-all performance annually, largely not even without the National Endowment for the Arts anymore. It does it largely independently now, based off of their own money that they are able to do, and it's worked as a major fundraising endeavor for them. Similar efforts are now being implemented like at the Kennedy Center, where they have their Millennium Stage program of a free performance at 6 p.m. every day in their grand foyer, 365 days a year. And it helps to make sure that the collaborative effort between performer and audience member remains the same that it's been for generations. But more modern applications of open access that have moved beyond that have been far more technological based. The big pioneer of this has been the National Theatre over in the United Kingdom, which has archived dozens upon hundreds of different performances, ranging from Macbeth to Sweeney Todd to the Book of Mormon, where they have digitized these performances in order to provide an experience for people who don't necessarily have the funds, means, or physical capabilities to going to a physical theater. However, in the process, by having all of this available for free online in a very traditional open access sense, you reshape the collaborative effort that exists within the theater because you cut the audience out of the equation. And so it then becomes a collaboration between media and the performer, which then can affect the way that things are staged in a theatrical production. It breaks down some of those limitations, especially because several productions use multiple cameras, so they don't have to just be stuck from one audience member's point of view. They can instead shift it. So it starts to become much more like a film. And as she explains in her 2015 book, The Audience as Performer, The Changing Role of Theater Audiences in the 21st Century, theater scholar Carolyn Heim notes that this takes the audience completely out of the equation and reshapes the way that they are conceptualizing theater by almost turning it into another type of art form rather than having it remain the theatrical experience that it's been for decades. But in order to solve that problem, the future of open access seeks to find a much more hybridized solution where people are able to access things without necessarily having to transport themselves all the way into a theater, because sometimes that's the hardest part for people who have physical impairments, to be getting into the theater, and instead having them still be in a communalized setting with a recorded performance. The biggest example is the Kennedy Center right now is undergoing a massive capital campaign project to be having an expansion added on. As part of this expansion, that huge white wall of the Kennedy Center, it's basically a giant shoebox. It'll be used as a projector screen to then be showing pre-recorded performances for an audience that is still gathered together for free. And so you take both parts of the previous methods of open access, of digitizing performances and making performances free, and therefore showing them to allow the audience collaboration with one another, and to therefore feed off of each other's energy when watching the show, not necessarily to feed off the performer's energy, but therefore allow people to have that experience of seeing a show with others. Because sometimes, especially if you're watching like a comedy, for instance, you might not catch a joke unless someone near you laughs. And so it creates a better understanding, largely, of the works that you're viewing, but also creates a collaborative effort between theater companies, which usually function fairly independently from one another. For instance, with the Kennedy Center's expansion project, they're not just going to be showing Kennedy Center productions, but the possibility for them to be showing things from the National Theater in the United Kingdom, or from other DC groups such as Arena Stage, Wolf Trap, etc., still exists. So they have not only the potential to provide this space to show their own performances in a collaborative way with an audience that can then increase their understanding, but also to collaborate with other theater groups, particularly because they need to be increasing the amount of interest in other theater groups if they want to increase the amount of arts interest in general from their audience. So it's become much less of a self-centered performer to audience relationship, and instead, audience members with one another and theater companies with one another in order to create the best relationship possible while still having technology be a sort of medium that they're able to show all of this through. So while open access is definitely a positive thing within the theater community, as far as more people are able to be exposed to all sorts of types of theater that they may not have been able to see before, it definitely has some questions that arise as far as at what point does theater stop being theater, and at what point are you necessarily losing out on the experience of going to the theater with one another? But those are questions that I think are going to have to be answered at a much later time after these plans, especially like at the Kennedy Center's expansion, have been in place for much longer. But open access definitely has had an impact in the theater community and won't be going away anytime soon.
So I'm going to be talking about curation in the form of social media. So it kind of jumps off of what both of them talk about, because it really represents the idea of how each one of us individually use social media to curate information and to form general concepts. So curation is generally defined as, it's mostly looked at in the sense of like museums with artifacts, but we're going to talk about it more in the sense of social media. So what it basically is the assembly of different types of data in order to show a general importance. So you take individual either Tumblr posts or Pinterest blogs, little things that you see that you like, and you create your own message that highlights something that's important to you. And we don't realize it, but most of us do this every single day, especially with the way that we use social media. So what I'm going to be talking about is how this curation, how it's formed, and then how it transfers our own personal identities to a much more professional world, and how the professional world and the personal world are intertwined together through curation. So first, one of the key things that we're going to talk about is Pinterest. Because if you've ever used Pinterest, then you know that it's a really fun way where you can create your own board that uses products and images from the entire web to display your own message. And this is actually the term that has been coined through Pinterest and other curation sites is reflexive identity building, which is when you create your own personal identity based off of products and information from the internet. So when I go on Pinterest and I see everything that I want to put in my bedroom, I can pin these onto one single board, and then the world can see what my ideal bedroom would look like through the products, like what my bed frame would be and what posters I'd have on my wall. I'm showing my own personal identity. So that's the whole concept of reflexive identity building. And what it does is it creates our own personality in the context of a business ecosystem. We're using products from the internet to show who we are. And this is also really common on other blog sites like Tumblr, where we're looking at clips from movies and different scenes or pictures, and we're creating our own blog that represents who we are and our personality type. So again, that's that reflexive identity building. And one of the major impacts of this that we're seeing as a changing culture is that people are more and more figuring out who they are through material products. And so it's encouraging a materialism that is completely different from materialism of the past. Rather than buying a ton of things and then saying, this is my personality through what I'm wearing or what I have, I'm doing that on the internet through social media. So there is a kind of a bridging between information and then how we communicate as a society and the identities which we build. So one thing that's really interesting is there is an idea that this could enhance creativity because I am pulling from so many different types of media, from so many different products, from so many things from the business ecosystem in order to create who I am. But there's a question of when does it become that we're simply reposting and we're not actually creating our own ideas and our own identities, but we're just reposting things from old Tumblr blogs or we're reposting images from Pinterest rather than showing who we are individually. So there's two sides of this. One side where we're creating our own identities through these products and we're enhancing who we are. And then the other side where are we actually thinking of our own identities anymore? Or are we just reposting other people's identities? So there's that whole issue of when does the product over become the person? Or does the person transform the product? And so it's kind of like the first major impact of curation when we're discussing it in terms of our Pinterest and our Tumblrs and our Instagrams and all the different products that we're transforming. And then there's another side of this as well that gets much more, rather than the person creating themselves from the professional, but how the professional world is changing the person as well. And this has a really big impact, specifically when we're talking about things like citizen journalism and creating blogs in order to promote discourse. There's a really great journal that's available through the Mason Libraries page that talks about discourse and digital practices, and they have an article that discusses doing digital discourse in the digital age. And one of the main things that it talks about is the breakdown of media roles thanks to like open access and curation. Because I can access all these different news articles and websites, then the way that I present them completely changes. And one of the big things that this talks about is blogs that are specifically set up and websites that are made with the purpose of sending a message about like global affairs or something that occurs within the United States. More and more we're seeing people creating their own websites or creating their own blog pages through websites like Tumblr that work as a gateway, where they're taking headlines from a news story and all of the different headlines from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and compiling them so that they can show how they read the issue. And that's a form of citizen journalism that's completely new, thanks to the open access to information and the way that it's being curated. It's how we influence our own taste into what's already existing. So like a great example of this is when there was a major situation with the US Republican Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott a few years ago, where he made comments that were largely believed to be pro-segregationist, and media completely took control over it. And it was individual citizens who were reposting things that they saw and sending messages to each other through media sites, creating whole blog pages that just compiled news articles together and different clippings from them in order to show a full range of what they saw happening. Rather than just reading one New York Times article and then talking to someone else about it, they're taking parts of a ton of different journals and news articles in order to create one single message and then displaying that message, which is a brand new type of curation thanks to open access that actually led the Senator Trent Lott to resign from his position. And there are a ton of examples like this. Another great one is veteran news anchor Dan Rather, who long before it was ever proved that him and CBS were mishandling evidence on a story they sent out about George W. Bush, he had to retire from his position early because the vast use of curation and social media, where people were basically judging him for what he did, forced him to retire from his position. So we're seeing that there is a greater accountability set up when we as individuals make the decision that we are going to present how we see the story. So by doing that, the news industry changes completely. Where there was a traditional journalism that was the interpretation of news and then the publication of it, it's now transformed to individuals doing research, compiling that research, and presenting their image of the story. So news comes more and more from what we see, and we're able to broadcast that. So that just kind of shows how through curation and through open access to all the different news articles, everything that's going on, we can present to the world our own idea of what's happening. And then like the last major way that I wanted to talk about curation is as a tool for new education forms, which is becoming really interesting. Because not only is there like this really personal world with Pinterest and Tumblr where we're changing our identities, and then the really professional world where we're influencing citizen journalism, but a completely new educational sector that's being reproduced through citizen journalism. One thing that teachers are more and more doing, and you've probably noticed this in your classes, is that for final projects, rather than just writing a paper, you might be asked to do something like create a website that it displays how you would send this information out, or create a blog post that explains your information in a way that's more accessible. So through open access, not only are you able to write a paper, but you're also able to curate all the information from your paper into one website that you can share with other people. So it takes education from a really why am I learning this approach to a much more, this is how I can actually apply this and expel this information into the real world. It's encouraging a virtual learning environment that's perpetuated by curation. So more and more we're seeing teachers and professors, even as low as in the high school, middle school level, encouraging students to infuse their personal identity into the research that they're doing by creating a website that expels key information that the student is learning in school. So that takes the social media and the curation of online information into a totally different sphere. So recap. Curation not only through bringing information together completely changes the way that we look at our own identities and the way that we build those identities, but it also is changing all forms of democratic participation through citizen journalism, and then it totally changes the educational sphere, making it one of the most impacting things across the board.
Media, I honestly believe that this is a very, very revolutionary thing, especially when talking about copyright laws. So with that being said, my speech is on copyright laws in the age of mashups and remixes. I think that's a very important thing, because we all listen to music mostly every day, I hope so. So this all started with the introduction and the advent of Napster, right? The first file sharing technology. And Napster was pretty revolutionary because it allowed people to really access certain songs online without having to go out and buy an album or going on, I don't even think iTunes was created back then, or Apple was still in its infancy. But it was the first big file sharing service where people could really go out and didn't have to buy an album to listen to a song. So it basically created a digital tsunami, making copyright laws much more important now than ever, right? A quick discussion with most of your parents, and they'll probably agree that music is not the same today as it was in the 1980s. If you show them Future, for example, they're going to be like, what is he saying? And so what that's created is this divide. The Napster generation has created a divide between people music in the past and music in the present, which is largely inclusive. Music now on takes sound bites, takes samples, takes parts of other songs, remixes other songs, and mashes up a bunch of other songs to create this new product. That sounds great, and it's very, very innovative for music and music genres like EDM, but the issue of copyright law, which is central to the idea of ownership, right? Who owns the rights to a song? Does the artist who made a song own the rights to a song? And that has made copyright enforcement significantly harder. Because now you have a bunch of independent artists who can go up and create their own remixes, create their own mashups, and that puts them in hot water because they may not be aware that they're stealing from people who have the copyright, right? So it's a big issue both on the enforcement side and for people and budding and inspiring artists who are trying to just make it out there. So there's two big differences and different viewpoints when we look at copyright laws is one, that these technologies have empowered creators to free themselves from the shackles of record companies, which a lot of us view as evil and very controlling, which with the right cause. But the same technologies that liberate us, and, or whoever who wants to make music, are also making it that much more difficult for people to earn a decent living, right? People like Aerosmith, for example, Steven Tyler, will not have a problem if someone rips off a certain part of Dream On. He has made millions of dollars. But for people who don't choose to go through record labels and create their own independent music, the way and the ability to earn a decent living, to earn a decent pay, and to create this revenue-generating model is much more hazy, right? So while it's very good and it liberates a lot of people, there are also a bunch of questions raised with how can I make money off this music? Because if you're not making money off of it, a big incentive to create music and pursue music as a career is therefore lost. So the basic argument that this presentation is going to talk about is that we need to reform copyright laws. We need a more forward-thinking copyright law system. And that would ideally channel these new age consumers and new age creators, what we're going to refer to as a post-Napster generation. Is that it's going to channel all these consumers into much better and much more functional digital marketplaces. We have to come to grips with the fact that music and a lot of public opinion regarding music has changed. People don't view the older school of music and copyright laws as the only proper way to create music. I firmly believe that music is an art form because it constantly changes and because it constantly adapts to today's society. And so, as we look to evolve music, we have to figure out what the rights are for people and for artists to use what kind of songs to evolve this kind of music genres. So first off, we're going to look at a couple of big case studies. How is this relevant in today's society? So there are two big songs right now, not even right now, that have been created in the post-Napster generation that are very, very specific to copyright laws. The first is Jay-Z's 1999 hit Big Pimpin', which I see a lot of people shaking their heads. Fantastic song. Big Pimpin' was the first major hit single that Jay-Z released, right? It propelled him into becoming this awesome music producer, what have you. But if anyone's heard the song, there's this very Middle Eastern and Arabic hook to it, right? And that was not Jay-Z's. Jay-Z did not create that. Who actually did create that was this person named Kosara Kosara, who was an Egyptian composer, and he created the song in 1957, right? Real old, right? But it's been around. But Kosara Kosara had the copyright laws and had the rights to own that music, that song. And so when Jay-Z and Timbaland released Big Pimpin', they used that as a hook. And so people thought 50 years later, it can't possibly be a problem. Who knows a song even exists? Well, the family did. And so for the past decade, there's been this huge lawsuit where Osama Fahmy, who is a nephew of Kosara Kosara, has argued that, one, you can't just use that hook, and second, the interpretation of that is really bad because it was made in a very Arabic context, right? And it was a very religiously important hook for them. And through the lyrics, who Osama argued were very derogatory towards women and a bunch of other subjects, people were not happy that this hook was used in the way that it was. But Jay-Z and Timbaland testified that they spent or paid EMI Music Arabia, I believe, EMI Music Arabia is a company, they paid them $100,000 for the license in 2001. So this has been an ongoing battle, being like, can they use this? And The Guardian just yesterday actually released an article saying the judge just dropped the case after a decade because they ruled that the lyrics were irrelevant. The lyrics and the interpretation of Big Pimpin' in relation to that song were irrelevant and that he didn't violate any copyright laws, primarily because they found the records, they paid, and that the lyrics didn't really change the meaning of the song that much and therefore could not be considered in a court of law. So that's one big thing that Jay-Z won, and Jay-Z always wins. The second big example is that Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams' song "Blurred Lines," which is controversial for more than one reason, multiple reasons. So earlier this year, in mid 2015, beginning or late 2014 is when it started. There's a lawsuit that basically Robin Thicke and Pharrell stole and plagiarized Marvin Gaye's song "Gotta Give It Up," and they were ordered to pay $7.4 million because the Gaye family filed a lawsuit saying that they did not have access, the copyright access, to that song. And later on, through different out-of-court settlements, the fine was reduced to $5.3 million, which is still a lot of money. But again, this goes to show the dichotomous relationship between there's no clear set of rules and no clear set of guidelines to how people can sample music and different samples of music from the past and incorporate that into something different, right? So now the question becomes, is remix culture and mashup culture a fad, or is it here to stay? And in my opinion, in the opinion of a lot of people, it's very much here to stay. The number of independent artists publishing remixes doesn't appear to be diminishing anytime soon. In fact, general interest in remix and mashups have been on a dramatic rise. And the two evidence of this are like websites like SoundCloud, Hype Machine, Spotify, whatever. Spotify not as much because it's not an independent run website. But again, if anyone's on SoundCloud, for example, I can go up right now and create my own remix to the newest Taylor Swift song and post it on SoundCloud, and that's not going through a record label at all. And that's a great way for a lot of people to gain access to my profile and the songs that I create. It's my way of distributing my music. I'm not making money off of it. I can cite the copyright, but I'm not making any money. It's just an online, independent way of me distributing my music to a bunch of people. But artists have a very, very good reason to be scared, right? A lot of artists are not publishing remixes, are not going through and trying to develop something new with older forms of music, because there's very much an industry, a small cottage industry is what it's called, that's been created around small-time copyright suits. In addition, a lot of lawyers take on copyright infringement claims just for commission, because it's very easy to draw out in a court, and because if people, or if artists rather, lose the case, again, Robin Thicke and Pharrell being a key example, the fines could be a lot of money, right? Because again, songs that have been copyrighted make money. They're revenue-generating forms of material. So that makes copyright infringement cases that much more important because, one, for lawyers, they make all the money by just drawing out copyright cases. But if I'm an artist who doesn't really know the law and that doesn't really know the culture around creating remixes, I could potentially be losing a lot, like millions of dollars, just by publishing a song online without following proper guidelines. So now the issue is, how do we fix it? We've proven that it's here to stay. This is not a trend that is just disappearing anytime soon. But also, the fact that there is an industry around it that is essentially made to litigate copyright infringement is very worrying. So, what are some copyright law suggestions? The biggest one that has been circulated and the one that's been spread is the idea of a remix compulsory license. And that tackles the larger point of remixes. We need to change the perception of remixes and mashups in and of itself. A lot of people are stuck in an old school train of thought that remixes don't create something new and that they don't really have a point or a purpose. But now, with the rise of this remix and mashup industry and the rise of remix and mashup culture, what we're seeing is a bunch of artists actually trying to create a new end product. Using something in the past, using samples, using certain hooks of songs, and completely putting their own interpretation on that to create a new end product. Which, for anything else, is artistic ingeniousness. It's creativity. It's what's needed, that license, that freedom to create something new and interpret something is very crucial, and it's at the crux of innovation, especially for music. So what the remix compulsory license would do is have basically outlines of songs submitted with songs that have been cited, usage times, like where and when in a song that you would use a certain thing that could potentially be a copyright problem. And based on the value of what you use, when you use, and how you use, a value would be assigned to a song. For example, a new song on iTunes is probably like $1.99, right? And maybe not even $1.99, maybe it was like 99 cents. Some songs are like 59 cents. So a lot of variables that depend the revenue of a song and it depends the value given to a song takes into consideration a lot of factors. Audience, how much work was used to produce a certain song, and a whole lot of other factors. So using like how many songs are cited, when and where they're used, a value would then be generated for these songs because they have a remix license. And then what that does is allow the Copyright Office, which essentially is a big overlord of all the copyright laws in America, then they get legitimacy and jurisdiction to make sure the distribution of the song file is very legal and in line with copyright laws. But what is a big part about remix compulsory licenses is that it allows us and allows the music industry on a larger holistic level to incorporate remix artists into authorized content markets. The reason SoundCloud and Hype Machine and what have you, whatever, are so big is because a bunch of people who post remixes aren't on things like Spotify or iTunes. Because again, that would be a direct contradiction with copyright laws. So a big reason why a lot of EDM genres are not like profitable, and the reason why a lot of people aren't publishing remixes is one, because there's no money to be made out of it, and second, because there's no possible way they can get into authorized content marketplaces with the largest audience, right? So with the remix compulsory license, it would pave the way for a bunch of authorized content marketplaces, perfect example being Spotify or iTunes, to incorporate these remix artists and incorporate artists who make mashups into revenue-generating streams and revenue-generating distribution models. What that does is more fans are then attracted to that source, it popularizes that source, and is part of a larger effort to legitimize the idea of remixing and mashup in general. The whole crux of this debate is, are remixes actual songs? Are they innovative? Do they break ground? And public opinion, again, seems to be saying yes. But if we want that to stay, and if we want music to keep changing because it is an art form, then we're going to need to make it significantly easier for people who do make remixes to come into authorized content marketplaces where they can make a living. So, in conclusion, the post-Napster generation has created a lot of copyright issues. We used case studies like Jay-Z's Big Pimpin' and Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines to show that this is not a fad, this is here to stay, and copyright law reformation is now more important than ever.
Who has a question for these young, bright minds? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Sam.
Yes.
I really liked how your discussion about disability inclusion and using open access to make the theater a more inclusive space is really great. But you really focused on physical disability, so how is the theater community making the experience of live performance more accessible to those with a neurodivergency or a psychological illness?
So neurodivergence and psychological illnesses are a little bit more difficult to address because they are not something that's visible. And so it is much more difficult for arts managers to address them properly. The biggest thing is there's been a movement for sensory sensitive performances in which, lights are dimmed rather than completely blacked out. Oftentimes they avoid blackouts altogether during a show in order to reduce the amount of stress, added stress that can be placed on people who have sensory deprivation. But also the use of sign language interpreters, technology in order to make things easier for people who have trouble listening or have trouble with their sight. There's a lot being done to that end, and a lot of digitizing the resources as well sort of makes it a little bit more accessible because while collaboration is essential among an audience in theater, that can often lead to stress, especially, if you are dealing with someone who perhaps has a condition where they get stressed just being around a lot of people, and theaters can often be very claustrophobic. But allowing them the opportunity to sort of view it from wherever and whenever makes sure that they are still able to access the art form in any way, shape, and form. I think that it's going to be something that continues to evolve among arts managers specifically, but it is a little bit more difficult to address because especially, if someone's in a wheelchair, you address that with a ramp or an elevator. But you don't necessarily know to what level neurodivergence will be felt in each person. So it's sort of, you have to handle it on a case-by-case basis. It's a lot of communicating both as a consumer and as a manager within theater in order to organize how you best overcome any hurdles that are in someone's way.
Yes, sir.
There was recently a performance at Kennedy Center that was specifically geared towards children with autism.
Then the Kennedy Center has been sort of a pioneer for it. Their VSA, or Very Special Arts Program, just had a big celebration anniversary for both the VSA program and the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was in tandem with a lot of the performances that were specifically geared towards autism spectrum disorder, etc. Yes.
Anybody? I have a question about the curation of music and sharing music and how that has affected young people and older people too, but young people and how they experience music. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the curation of music is also really interesting because kind of like what AK said, as people are creating their own musical identities through the collaboration of music, it's definitely kind of like how I talked about transforming the personal to the professional, taking the role away from just the artist themselves and making it your own. And the way that we mash up songs together, the way that we curate music has changed the music sphere completely. And that's a lot of what AK talked about in the sense of making it less about iTunes and the artists and more about us as individuals and our personal identity that we find through the music.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that, again, in terms of music curation, I think it's, if we're looking at the fact that we create a reflexive identity on social media and online platforms, it then follows logic that music on a broader level, whether they be remixes or mashups, be more widely available to public audiences. So I think the curation of music in relation to reflexive identity creation makes it that much more vital that we do reform copyright laws so that people can express their individual artistic creative liberties and publish songs without fear of litigation and without fear of a multi-million-dollar fine.
Yes, sir.
So, AK, I thought your presentation was very interesting, and you brought up some really good points, and I agree that the copyright laws may need some modifications. But one thing I wanted to get you to clarify a little bit, when you use these two case studies, the one about Robin Thicke, that wasn't really a case of them using a sample unauthorized and not knowing the laws of when to pay for a sample. That was a case of plagiarizing, either intended or unintended. And this issue goes way, way back. I mean, Led Zeppelin was sued also for plagiarizing, old blues artists. And, plagiarism, as you probably know, is up to interpretation. When is it and when isn't it? But it wasn't a case of, not knowing when to pay for a sample. They either intentionally or unintentionally copied somebody else's song. So I don't really think that that's a case of, not having clear copyright laws. It's more, when do you cross the border into plagiarism and when do you not?
Right, and I think that those two case studies were meant to show the dichotomy in how people actually interpret copyright infringement, right? So Jay-Z just used a sample of a hook and used that to create a song. Robin Thicke and Pharrell allegedly plagiarized in the same melody and the same lyrics in using blurred lines. So while they may not have used the file as a sample, the melody and the lyrics still were considered a sample from Marvin Gaye's song Gotta Give It Up. Same thing with Kanye West. Blood on the Leaves, if anyone knows, uses a bunch of samples, and that's used to make a political message, right? Kanye is very, very vocal in the fact that that song is a political message. So even though it is used as a...
Sorry. Yeah, the hook, for those of you who haven't heard it, is Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. And then it goes through that, and then he makes a rap about, like, you know, structural inequality, structural racism, and how that, like, violence, racially influenced violence hasn't gone away. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, and so again, it might come down to the fact that you might literally need to cite and use a part of a file and then cite that versus just replicating the melody and the lyrics, which I think what Pharrell and Robin Thicke were trying to do, and that was crossing the line into plagiarism rather than creating an interpretation of the file.
But I mean, there are ways that you can do just that. You can use a melody and lyrics by requesting mechanical rights.
Of course.
They didn't go that route.
Of course. And again, that's also an example of the fact that people weren't aware that they were plagiarizing. I don't think anyone here thinks Robin or Pharrell intentionally tried to rip off Marvin Gaye. But again, that goes to show that what they did without going through the proper procedures for acquiring the mechanical rights to the copyright would then cross the line into plagiarism, and I don't think those standards are clear for a lot of artists who want to create music. So I think while yes, it's not as clear of a case of copyright infringement as the Jay-Z example, and it's much more of crossing the line into plagiarism, I think those two examples go very differently in explaining that one is about using certain parts of a song and the other is about what procedures need to be taken to acquire a copyright and what then draws a line into plagiarism and not like artistic interpretation.
I have a comment about that. Let's not forget, though, that we have fair use to rely on, which is part of copyright law, and a very important exemption for those of us who are using content that's copyrighted in a new way. But the question is, there are 4 elements that you have to, take into consideration when you're considering using other people's content, and you go through an analysis of those 4 elements, and you make a decision based on your evaluation as to whether your use is a fair use. So let's take, for example, are people familiar with Kudiman on YouTube, who is an incredible mashup artist? And he takes video from YouTube, so from regular people like you and me, who post songs that they're doing, not necessarily their personal songs, but songs that they're doing. They're singing them, or they're playing music with different instruments, or so on. And he creates a completely new composition using bits and pieces of these videos, audio-visual content, and making this wonderful stuff, And he doesn't seek permission from these individuals necessarily. He does give them credit on his YouTube channel and for each song that he creates. And for the most part, it's well received. I don't know that he's making any money from that, but even if he is making money, that doesn't mean that he cannot rely on fair use. So think about this when you are making or using other people's content, and we can certainly help you with that if you would like. But anyone else have any points they want to make or questions about for our distinguished panel? Okay, well, thank you all.